I wanted to check in with you, like to actually see how you are feeling in this moment heading in. So, what I'd love for you to do is take a look at this. Are you looking at what is called a mood meter?
I am.
Are
Wow,
you
cool.
familiar with this?
No, but I like it already.
Awesome. Okay, so this mood meter is developed by Dr. Mark Brackett at the Yale Institute for Emotional Health and Well-being.
Mhm.
And it is based on the y axis of high to low energy and the x axis of pleasantness, low to high. And the idea is that all feelings are acceptable. And I would just love for you to take a moment. Tell me honestly how you're feeling. And actually, I'd love to ask you after we chat as well. So let's just
So how many do I choose?
could you choose maybe one, either word, or you can also give me coordinates like 3 to the right in terms of pleasantness and down 2 in terms of energy?
Oh, wow. I would say I'm enthusiastic. I would say I'm definitely in the upper right in the
Mm.
yellow. I don't know if that's just because that's my general nature or I think I'm excited about your project.
Thank
So
you.
I think it's really interesting that this is something that others are feeling is worthwhile to record. I think that just as doctors and nurses and people on the front lines in that respect have a story to tell, I think that teachers have a story to tell that's unique to the profession as well. And it's not just, doing a corporate world pivot to Zoom and Google Meets, but it really was just an enormous life adjustment and professional adjustment in a way that I don't think most professionals really experienced to the degree that teachers did.
I agree. And I think that that's the importance of this podcast to capture how groundbreaking and life altering this change was. Can you
Mhm.
start by sharing about yourself, what you do, where you work, what
Sure.
your role is?
Well, let's see. I guess I'm a lifelong educator. I went to Duke. That's how I know Lindy. And we were sorority sisters together, which now we kind of cringe at when we identify ourselves as sorority sisters because it's not exactly, like how you in this society, you definitely want to, uh, categorize yourself. But we had a lot of fun. We were lucky. We're a lucky group. There's a lot of them out in San Francisco.
Mm,
So I went to Duke for undergrad, and I lived abroad for a year, and then I went back to Duke for my
mm,
Master of Arts in Teaching High School Social Studies. It was a really specialized master's degree. Initially, I thought I was going to be an archaeologist, which is why I went to Duke. And when I learned that I was going to have to learn 4 languages, including Aramaic, which is
ah,
dead language, I realized it probably isn't for me. But I studied abroad in Israel, which was cool. And anyway, that's a little bit of a random tangent. But I really kind of came to teaching as a default because my
mm.
father had said, there's no way that my daughter's going to graduate from Duke University and have no life skills whatsoever. Well, I had graduated, undergrad with 0 life skills. I was a history major and I was a Judaic studies and women's studies minor, but there still wasn't a damn thing I could do with it.
Wow.
So the deal for me to be able to go abroad for the year was that I would apply to this graduate program. And the philosophy being, well, the worst thing that can happen is that I don't enjoy teaching, but I'll always have a master's degree.
Mm,
And I feel like I'm one of the lucky ones. I feel like a lot of people go into teaching because they are told that you have your summers off and you have great retirement plans if you work for the state. And that is so not the reason to go into teaching. And I really believe you either love it and you belong there and it's a calling. I really think it's a vocation, or you have no business being there because you're doing more harm than good.
Mm.
And so I got really, really lucky. I loved it. I was hired right out of Duke to New Trier High School, which is one of the, I think, most well-known high schools in the country. And I was there for 7 years, and I was tenured at 26, and I was made a master teacher at that same year. And I thought I had never worked so hard in my life. Oh, there's my daughter in the background.
Hello.
That's okay.
I love it.
She's 16.
Life goes on.
I know. Welcome. Yeah.
Right?
Life on
Yes.
Zoom, right? And I that was a wonderful training ground for me because the culture of excellence was so just part of what you were doing there. You know, it's one of the highest income places in the country. I'm sure very similar to the Bay Area, and really high achieving families and students. And I actually ended up leaving there when I got pregnant because I had a high risk pregnancy and I had to go on disability. Little did I know that was the best thing that could have happened, because I really shouldn't have. That's really not where my strengths lie. I was raised in a very similar community, for lack of a better way to say it, you know, predominantly white, upper middle class. Do you have a question? Oh, hold on one second. It's downstairs on the white table. That's okay. It's all right. And okay, what was I going to say? Oh, it just felt like, you know, a lot of people would say to me, well, are you really making a difference by teaching in a school like New Trier? And I actually really did, because I felt like, because I grew up in such a similar environment, that my ability to understand what a lot of those students were going through was very high. That my empathy meter was high. But at the same time, you know, it was challenging because it was such a manipulation on the part of parents, of teachers, you know, this sense that you work for them and you're beholden to them. And, you know, the idea of Vanderbilt being a second tier school is just kind of nuts to me. But anyway, that's old news. So anyway, I got 2 years of maternity leave. And then I decided I didn't want to go back because I lived in downtown Chicago. I started a tutoring business. And so I continued working with those types of students, but I only worked 10 hours a week and I made the same amount of money. So
my goodness.
I know. So I was always teaching. And then we moved my husband and I met in Chicago. Neither one of us is from here. So we had no allegiance to suburbs, but we wanted to move to a suburb that had a good public system, just in case one of our kids ultimately had a learning disability or a need. We weren't going to spend 30 grand on kindergarten, where we would still have to hire a tutor. And that was part of me being a teacher and knowing like the reality of you know, very well-meaning parents who send their kids to private school thinking it's going to be the best experience when it isn't always. So anyway, that brought me out to Oak Park, which is where I live now. It is a very liberal community, which I love. We are interfaith. My husband is Jewish. We've raised our kids as Jews, and we were sure that we were just so unusual. But around here, I mean, we're like, what? You're like Wonder Bread, you know? Like here, everyone's like, you mean you don't have any like trauma? You don't have any? No, we really don't. So anyway, I worked for about 6 years for the high school where my children go as an off-campus teacher, and I worked with at-risk kids. We live in a suburb that is the first suburb west of the city. So you actually have to go through one of the very worst neighborhoods in the city to get to Oak Park. And so, as happens in urban communities, our high school has a lot of students who somehow finagle the residency so that they can attend the school. Ultimately, there's just a lot of triaging in a school of that nature. And so we had a really unique program at OPRF where if you were suspended, every day that you were suspended, you had an hour of tutoring paid for by the school and done by the school by teachers hired by the school. So I did that for years while my children were younger. And it was wonderful. And the reason I'm bringing that up is I think that ultimately that was the segue to get me into my current position. I think I just felt um, the work was so much more meaningful for me and in a level where students really otherwise wouldn't have had access to people who
Mm.
really cared about what they were doing. And, I was working with kids who were very aggressive in the classroom. And then when I was working with them, I learned it was because they couldn't read.
Oh,
And, I was in a position where I was able to suggest a lot of in school interventions that ultimately were able to get the kids, back in a better place. I had some girls on maternity leave at 15.
mm,
And
mm.
we had a relationship with the library where we had reserved rooms where we would meet with our students. So I would tell the girls, just bring your babies. It doesn't matter if you don't have childcare. I'll hold your baby while, I'm teaching. And or while they were taking a test, I would walk with the babies through the stacks, and
What a
like, do
story.
you have a stroller? No, I don't have it. So like I go on Facebook and I say, okay, I'm working with a student. She's got a new baby. Does anybody have any newborn equipment? And like literally people would drop stuff off at the library for me to give, for me to give to the girls. I mean, it was awesome. It was great. And my favorite story from that is my student who she had her baby in August after her freshman year. And it turned out that she's brilliant.
Mm,
And she was going back to school. Our high school also has a childcare program where children of students can also go along with children, faculty,
mm.
and staff. And I met with the teachers. I said, listen, you don't know why she's out because she didn't want anybody to know, but she is a new mother. And if she comes to your class and she has on zero sleep, this is why. But she's absolutely brilliant. And I just beg of you to show her some compassion for what she's doing. She wants to be a nurse. And she ended up graduating a year early and getting her nursing degree. I know. Isn't that great?
That is
So
amazing.
it was a function of being in a place that supported that type of learning and also provided those supports for non-traditional students, recognizing that you can't just say you can't be here. You have to find ways to support where they are in that moment. So I think that just created I think it was such a moment where I realized that I had this ability to give to a different community of students than what I was used to. And
Wow.
that was really where I wanted to continue.
Mm,
And that even as a white woman of privilege, you know, doesn't matter when somebody loves you and cares about you. It doesn't matter what color your skin is. There's sometimes I feel like our world is so focused on I want to acknowledge my privilege. Well, yeah, but I think some people do that for the attention of acknowledging their privilege instead of
mm.
just saying, yeah, I'm a white woman and I have this great education. Oh, that's another thing. I cannot tell you how many times in my life people have said, how can you justify being a teacher having gone to Duke? How about that?
Wow. Because the assumption is with a Duke education, you should be making more of a difference.
Yeah.
But now you did find a way to make a difference. And the culture
Mhm.
of excellence for you looks different than it did in your childhood and
Very much so.
in that first role. So where are you? I
So
so appreciate
where
that.
am I now?
Yes, where
I'm
are you
sorry. I'm just like,
now? Don't I love it.
Mm. When my daughter started middle school, it was pretty clear that I was ready to get back in the classroom. And the program itself had been outsourced to a different separate organization. So the off campus teaching program kind of became defunct, which was devastating to me. But I think it was the push that I needed. And so I spent a year filling a bunch of long term subs because, unbeknownst to me, in the 15 years that I had really been out of the classroom, the culture of getting back into the school had changed dramatically, you
Mm.
know, and it's so difficult now for families to live on just one income that if a woman takes her maternity leave, she comes back. Whereas when I started in the mid 90s, people did not go back. You were like, if you got a maternity leave, you were like, yes, because you
That
knew
is
she
a
wasn't coming
whole I
back.
would love to talk about women in the workforce too. That's a whole other podcast episode. I love it,
Well, I
Julie.
teach women's studies, so that's
Oh,
I would be
ooh.
happy to talk to you
So we
about
will
that.
go there in this conversation.
Yeah. So it was very humbling for me because I had these 2 degrees from Duke. I had been tenured at New Trier High School. I was a master teacher and I could not get a job. I could not get a job. And it's still hard for me to say that because
Yeah.
I just assumed that I would be wanted. You know, why wouldn't you want me? And they didn't. I was too expensive. Schools were hiring people who had less than 5 years of experience because it kept their costs down. So it was
Public
pretty
schools were
devastating.
hiring. It was
Say that
public
again.
schools? Was it public
Public
schools?
schools. Public
Wow,
schools were
you were
not
too
hiring.
expensive coming back with 15 years of experience.
Mhm.
Mm.
And all the diversity of experiences. Plus, I had, these wonderful letters of recommendation from New Trier. I mean, I left New Trier on a very positive note. I left of my own choice. New Trier
Mm.
wouldn't even hire me.
So you were devastated
I was
and
devastated
humbled. You
because
couldn't.
I really thought that I was taking this time to be with it turned out that I loved motherhood. That was unexpected for me. I never
Mhm.
thought that I always thought I would be a working mom. And when I had these children, I was just absolutely besotted with them. And
Mm.
fortunately, my husband was like, great, this is great. And I said, but is it great that we're going to lose my income? He goes, well, we'll figure that out. So
Mm.
we did. And those are definitely choices that you make, but it was absolutely the right choice. And I loved being home with both of my children. It was, I really think that it ultimately has paid off. And now that they're teenagers and entering adulthood, I feel like I'm just glad I did what I did.
Mm.
Even though I lost out on some significant earning power. But you got to make your choices there. I feel like a lot of people are so focused on the money that they're not focused on the life. And anyway, that's another topic altogether. So I was devastated. And in Illinois has a fantastic retirement system. And so I never considered working in a private school because it would have taken me out of the Illinois retirement system.
Okay.
So I really had to make a conscious decision. And there's this wonderful school that's a mile from my house that I drove by for 10 years. And I always wondered what went on there. So I went on their website. They're hiring in the history department. So I called and by the end of that, I had an interview for the department chair position.
Wow.
and,
Yes.
and so then I went, in for the interview and I had an offer that was $10,000 less than what I had been making when I left New Trier 15 years earlier.
Wow. These are the sacrifices that women make
Yeah.
for nurturing and motherhood.
Yeah. It's a conspiracy.
Oh.
No, it's not. It's the reality of a patriarchal society where men have more earning power.
Mm.
Like even when my husband Howard and I were deciding, when I said I cannot leave these babies.
Mm.
And if he had been the one who'd been making more money, he would have stayed home. I mean, we had no issue with that egalitarianism in our marriage. It was really a function of I felt that in my career, I could jump in again and that my earning power was never going to be what his is. But little did I know that turned around and bite me in the butt because I couldn't even get hired in a public school.
And yet you took the job with
Yeah.
the offer of $10,000 less than you had made 15 years before. And what was this job?
So I teach now we're to present. So
Mm.
I just finished my 4th year teaching and I teach at an all girls Dominican Catholic school in River Forest, Illinois. Never in a million years did I think that this would be my career path trajectory. And I can say, even after this absolutely crazy year, that it is by far my favorite job that I've ever had.
Tell me
Isn't that
about that.
crazy?
Why is it is it crazy? I don't know. Tell me, what
I
is
think
it
it's crazy.
that sings to you about this job?
Well, when I was in my interview, it'd been so long since I had really actually interviewed. I mean, like when I say I couldn't get a job in a public system, I have to do everything on AppleTrack and all those systems. And I'm sure I just wasn't putting in the catchwords that you're supposed to put in. I mean, my application wouldn't even be pulled for an interview. I mean, I was like a
Persona
pariah.
non grata.
I
Somehow.
mean, it was terrible. It was terrible. And then even where the last school that I was doing a long-term leave, I had assumed that I would take this job because the person wasn't coming back. And they
Mm.
made it very clear that a 45-year-old white woman was the last person that they wanted to hire. So even though I had come in, I had saved this school, I not saved the school, saved this class. I had helped out this principal tremendously. And I just assumed, and I even said to him when I took it, I said, because I had another job at that point, and I said, I'm assuming that if I come back, that this is there's a very good likelihood that I would then take over the position permanently. And that was not to be, because I am not the profile that they wanted to invest in for their diversity and inclusion program.
Julie, I have to say, I'm really surprised by this. And you're obviously conveying your disappointment and
Yeah.
astonishment at the time, because people assume that white women are a dime a dozen in education. And so they're hired because those are the options. But you're saying, in your experience, that taking a step away for 15 years to be
Mhm.
the loving mother that you wanted to be
And to
precluded
work
you.
part-time. I had my own business. I was at LLC. I was working for this other high school. I thought I was doing everything right.
You were
Everything
still
right.
teeing up job moves.
Yes.
And so at the all girls Dominican school called
Trinity High
Trinity,
School.
at
Mhm.
Trinity High School, you were the last choice as a 45-year-old white woman?
No, actually, I was
Okay.
not. I was not the
Okay.
last choice.
Okay. That's they said, be our department chair.
Yes, they did. So in my interview, I said to them, it is important for you to know that I'm not Catholic, and my husband is Jewish, and my children are Jewish, and I'm a feminist. I don't know how this fits in with your doctrine, but I feel like you should know this going into it. And they said, we think it's great. And we think all of this is what the school needs. The school needs diversity of thought, diversity of experiences among their teachers and faculty. And so this isn't a negative for us at all. This is nothing but a positive. So I thought that was really cool.
That is really cool,
Yeah.
because you were welcomed by this
Yes.
Dominican
And you know
community.
what they said later? I said, well, why me? Because then I found out that I had actually beaten out a pretty prominent name in the community for this position. And I said, why me? And they said, it was your experience as an off-campus teacher
The
and what the way you
experience
talked about it that resonated with us, and we knew you were the right fit for the school.
in the library, getting baby carriages for the mamas, celebrating the future nurses with these non-traditional. I love that. So
Yeah.
what has your role been? What has your classroom been like? Let's do the 4 years before March 2020.
Or 3 years before March 20.
3
Okay.
years, right?
So the school has about 400 students. About 60% of our students receive some type of financial assistance, either through scholarships at the school or through the Madonna Scholarship or the Archdiocese. There's just all different kinds of scholarships. I would think 40%, I want to say 40, maybe it's 25, somewhere between 25 to 40% of our graduates who are attending college are the very first in their families to attend college.
Mm.
So there are over 62 zip codes reflected in our student body. Crazy, isn't it?
Wow.
And dozens of languages spoken at home other than English. So we have a very we have a very significant Latina population.
Mhm.
We also have a Eastern European, Ukrainian, Lithuanian, um, Black population. We have the daughters of many, many firemen, police officers, teachers who work for the city of Chicago. They are required to live within the city boundaries, but don't necessarily want their children going to CPS. So they go
Choose
private.
Trinity.
They choose Trinity, yeah. And the school's are here for 102 years. So it has this really wonderful tradition. And, the Cincinnatus, I didn't know a whole lot about Catholicism before I started working here, but
Tell us.
they are really liberal. I mean, they are pro-immigration. They are anti-death penalty. They are just this very loving and responsive community. And that's been pretty cool to work in a place like that, that is kind of like, all right, our job is to empower our girls where they are when they come into our school. They've all had an incredible diversity of experiences before they've even arrived. And it's not like a public school that has a feeder system where you kind of know the 5 schools that are coming in there, or you can work really closely with these middle schools. We've had dozens of schools that feed into Trinity. So we have to be very flexible and adaptive in how we meet our students' needs.
What
And
does that
that's
look
cool.
like? What does that look like in your classroom, Julie? So you're
Mhm.
adaptive, you come from a particular background, and
Right.
now you're teaching history and you're the department chair at this liberal Dominican, all girls, multilingual, blue collar. So what were you teaching in history?
Well, at the same time, there are many people who intentionally choose Catholic education for the Catholic education. So I think
Wow.
at all times, I'm always mindful of the fact that as much as I love the liberal platform of the Dominicans, bottom line, parents are working many jobs in some cases. And in some cases, we have exceptionally wealthy students too. It's a real cross section. I feel like when I'm looking at my classes, I'm looking at a cross section of Chicago, which is exciting.
It is.
So I have to be very mindful, particularly I teach women's studies. And obviously when we're teaching women's studies, we're dealing with issues of uh, freedom of choice in our bodies and sex before marriage. And you always have to be mindful of the Catholic doctrine and respectful of that.
Yes.
Um, and you can do that. What I have found is you can be very progressive in your teaching just by sharing many different schools of thought. So I've never been a teacher who's felt that the way I feel should be guiding the direction of the class. That's not fair to students. I don't think it's ethical. One of the best compliments I got this year was a student in my US history class who said, "Mrs. Klein, after all this, I still don't really know who you voted for."
And that was a great compliment to you
It was a great
because
compliment. It was great because it meant that I had really provided a balanced perspective
mm,
during this year of all years,
mm,
which is very important. So, I think when you walk into my room, it's this old building and there's still chalkboards, but I do have like a projector, which is nice. I have the Pride rainbow. I
mm.
have the sign that is, written in all different languages. Hate has no home here. I have, the posters of all different kinds of leaders of different
Yes.
groups. I have all kinds of student art just from the years, and I do a lot of art projects in my
Mm.
classes, and I do that because, and I did a lot of that this past year, and I realized that sometimes the kids just want to color, and when you give them a piece of paper and some ideas, they do absolutely extraordinary things. And um, I also learn so much more about my students
Can
when
you
I
give me
give
an
them those.
example? What does an art project look
Sure,
like
let's
and why?
see. I'm trying to think what I did with women's studies, because I taught women's studies and I taught leadership. Well, there's this great blogger, and I've used some of her work. What is her name? She does this whole thing on one pagers. Her name's Betsy. I gotta remember her last name. And I follow her blog, and she is an English teacher. And so sometimes I'll let them watch something, and then I'll have them interpret it in a one pager, and I'll give them a template because some people are really like, I need the boxes that I have to
Yes.
fill. And then, but if they want to do it their own way, they can. So I might say two quotes from what you watched, um, three takeaways. How do you feel about what you watched? What are your opinions? And then they can just go to town on it. So there are some, I'll have a rubric in terms of what the required elements
Mm.
are, but then they can produce it any way they want to.
So they
So
express themselves while synthesizing
yeah, I'm
whatever the
sure there's a
lesson.
much stronger pedagogical term for this that it has fallen out of my brain. But
But
you
we
know, it
want any listener to appreciate what's happening in your classroom without throwing jargon. So this works.
And then, I did a lot of things over the past year where, you just Google that, it's like I was taught leadership. And I guess one of the things that, I don't know if you want me to move into what this past year has been like. Well, I'll tell you about the years leading up to it. So I have taught probably a dozen of the social studies classes. The principal who was there before, our current principal, really wanted me to teach all of the classes in the department. And
Mm,
that was really overwhelming. I didn't love that because I think one of the most important parts of teaching is being a reflective teacher. And you
yes.
can't be a reflective teacher if you're constantly teaching new preps because you write all these notes down to yourself about how you want to change it up, and then you don't get that chance to change it up. And
So when you say you want to be a reflective teacher, you're not talking about feedback to the students so much as,
well, that too.
okay, but
Both.
to this point, you're saying if a teacher has too many preps, then they can't perfect and
Right.
tweak. And the recursive process for the whole year is so long that things get lost.
Mhm.
Okay, so that's helpful for our listeners to hear that teacher load makes a difference in terms of your creative output. And
Oh, uh,
yes,
absolutely. And that I think is one of the most frustrating um, aspects of teaching. And it is why we lose teachers. There's always this joke about the load of the first year teacher. The first year teacher is always the dumping ground in terms of, well, this is a singleton we need a teacher for. Or this is a new course we need you to teach. And I want to say this is antithetical to the process of teaching. Why would you not start by giving a teacher a class, maybe two preps that they can really master, and then
yes,
allow them to continue teaching those the next
yes,
year, maybe then bringing in an elective class that they teach. The other thing that I think is essential is mentorship. If
yes,
you are not providing mentoring for students, and that's one of the things that I would say was fundamental to my experience teaching at New Trier. It was extraordinary in terms of its professionalism and the professional support. There
Mm,
was nothing that was too much. There was no professional development that they would not authorize. We all had mentors and we worked in a big department. We
mm,
actually moved to different classrooms. So you were always kind of in this kind of beehive of activity and information, depending on who had their free period when you did, where you could just constantly be asking questions of these really wonderful, experienced
mm,
educators who had so many different ideas.
mm.
So I've never really forgotten that. I had a tremendous department chair there too, Debbie Johnson, who was just absolutely incredible.
Mm.
And now that I'm a chair myself, I'm constantly thinking, okay, what would Debbie have done in this situation?
Ah,
You know?
what would Debbie do? The
Yeah.
power of
So
mentorship. So
yeah,
you finally you got into your groove after you'd been
big groove.
overworked,
Hmm.
and part of your groove in the classroom is teaching leadership creatively.
Hmm.
What was lost in the transition of pandemic learning, or what was gained?
Well, that's a great question. So last year, which was my third year there, I then there was a whole shift in leadership at the school. And it was kind of a scary time. We had a big turnover of our teachers who felt rattled by that and just, didn't like that upheaval. And I have this wonderful department of, there's four of us. And it seemed like there's this one position kept changing. We'd have a teacher for a year and leave, a teacher for a year and leave. And we had just hired a new teacher. And um, I I was so passionate about wanting this department to stay whole, because that's another thing that schools or communities don't realize is that teacher retention is really essential to building strong programs. Students like knowing what's ahead. Students like
Mm,
knowing their freshman year. Oh, this is a teacher I might have for my junior year of this class,
I
or
see.
this is the teacher who teaches psychology, or this is the teacher who teaches CPUSH. And, I'm really excited about that. Well, when you constantly have a turnover of teachers, that's not healthy for anybody. It's not
Mm,
healthy for the school. It's not healthy for the students. It's
mm.
not healthy for the faculty and those relationships that they've established. And so I felt really passionately that I wanted to do everything to keep this department whole. And then the pandemic hit.
Oh, and then the pandemic hit.
And ironically, now this is crazy. One of the things that we had been doing in January and February were professional developments internally, because the weather in Chicago is so dreadful in the winter, and you would have oftentimes you'd have to have cold weather days. Like literally it was like 30 degrees below zero, and you
Mm.
can't have kids waiting outside of buses to go to school. But we were
Cold weather
losing
days.
cold weather days. It's a thing. So we were losing days of instruction, and we're on a block system at Trinity. So if one block is a semester. So if you lost 3 or 4 days in one block, that's like losing over a week
Yes.
in the
So do I
classroom.
hear you saying that somehow you anticipated the need for remote learning
Yes.
because of cold days?
Yes.
Yes. So
So we
you
had learned Zoom.
you had learned Zoom. Amazing. You
We
well,
had
you
learned
that's a first.
we had learned Zoom, we learned Screencastify, we had learned Jamboard, we had learned
Yes.
Edpuzzle,
I love everything.
all these things. We hadn't mastered it by any stretch. These were things that we were just kind of doing in these PDs, but we had teacher experts who were
Mm,
teaching it, who were kind of the go-to people, because we just really felt that moving forward, if we had these cold days, instead of them being days of lost instruction, that if we were able to communicate with our students, and even giving them a TED talk that they watch that supplemented something in the textbook,
mm.
at least it wouldn't be a dead day.
That's right.
And so ironically, when the pandemic hit, we were not in a panic at our school because it was kind of like, oh, this is cool. We can use these new things we've been working on. And, it was only supposed to be 2 weeks. So,
Right.
so we thought, oh, okay, here we go. And so we were in a really great position. And in fact, I would go so far as to say that we were one of the only schools in the Chicago area that during the real lockdown of last spring, we did not change our curriculum. We finished teaching with full curriculum. We did not implement do no harm in the sense of the grades that students had either stayed or went up. Now, I know people might philosophically have had problems with that, but we busted our butts to make
Yes.
sure that those kids had everything of us
So
to
that
get
is
them
what I'm
through.
curious about. It sounds like you miraculously had these had things in place, and that you were able to work through the curriculum, which
Mhm,
was rare and special. But
mhm.
tell me about busting your butt. Like, as Julie, not just Mrs. Klein, what was happening to you between March and June of 2020? What was your emotional state? And you were anchoring the department. So tell me how
Yeah.
you're feeling about this.
Well, it was interesting because my son had to come home from college and he was obviously devastated about that. He was a freshman.
Mm,
And I have a daughter who is a sophomore, and my son, my husband, who is in marketing and advertising, he did a full pivot home. On the one hand, it was a blast, and I feel terrible saying that, but,
yes.
I guess it goes back a little bit to the having been home for
Mm.
many years with my with my kids. It was really fun. We had you'd wake up in the morning, the first thing everybody'd say is, "What's for dinner?" Which I came to absolutely loathe, but I realized then that dinner had become this new event in our home. So, I think we all felt like if we could get to dinner, "Okay, we'll get to dinner." Um, there was definitely a sense of overwhelm for me with teaching international baccalaureate. It's such an intensive course. I teach IB juniors and we teach the internal assessment junior year, which is, an extraordinarily rich research project that requires many, many steps, multiple revisions. I had only taught it once before, and I didn't know how I was going to pull this off. So I wasn't as worried about my other classes as I was about providing a really high level of instruction to these students who deserved that.
Yes.
And the IB program is a 2-year program, and I was terrified that I was
Mm.
not going to have them in a good place. Again, thinking that everything would be back to normal in September, I didn't want this particular cohort of students to struggle because I dropped the ball.
How did
So
you work through that terror? What got you through?
um, wine? No, I'm kidding. Actually, no, we were really good about that. We had to really behave. We had my husband and I. So my husband is really funny because he is a creature of habit. He
Mm.
has a significant commute downtown every day, and so we would get up in the morning early, and it was his idea to implement our own version of a commute so that we could actually create structure in our days. There was one coffee shop in Oak Park that stayed open throughout the pandemic. It was called Fire Cake, and it was 2 miles to get there. So we get up in the morning and we walk to Fire Cake, and I'd get my cup of tea, and he'd get his cup of coffee, and we'd feel kind of normal. And we're like, what do you need to stay open? They were having like all this GoFundMe stuff, and we're
Mm.
like tipping them $20, just stay open. And then we'd walk back, and then I would be on the first floor, and then he would be on the second floor, and we would start our day. And then dinner was a really big thing. We would stop everything and do dinner. But I worked till about midnight or one every single day that we were in lockdown,
I want to say that again. As an educator and department chair, you worked every day until
every
midnight.
day.
or one, and you experienced terror and overwhelm
Mhm.
because of because
The
of
unknown.
the unknown.
The unknown, and obviously this also is part of who I am as well. I when I talk about my students, I talk about my girls.
Mm,
I they are very important to me as human beings. And I knew, because I have a daughter who's a teenager, I knew how hard it was for my daughter to do this transition. And she's in a really safe and comfortable environment. We had all the things she needed to be successful. And many of my students do as well, but many of my students don't. And for many of my students, coming to school is the best part of their day,
because
because it's a place where they are affirmed for who they are. They're not judged. There's kindness, there's acceptance, there's encouragement. You asked about my classroom, and my classroom has always, I've always had a drawer of food. I've always had on my desk, I have this whole container of fidget things, so that when students came in, if they needed to grab something and, just to have it at their desk, they could. I have yoga balls that they can sit on if they need to. Sometimes kids would come in and be like, "Oh man, Mrs. Klein, it's a yoga ball day.
yeah,
I need the yoga ball." So that's what they would be sitting on. That was what they
space
did.
for learning changed in terms of safety, affirmation, the joy of fidgeting, the access
Yeah.
to food. So I'd actually, I'm really curious about the intersection of your fear and your students have and have not,
Mhm.
and how you created support for your students while still navigating your, 4 hours of sleep.
Well, I think one of the things that I would say that people who are not teachers need to understand about the teachers who really did, and I know this sounds blasphemous, I'm sure, but not every teacher felt this way.
Mm.
There were many teachers, and I have so many friends who just told me how disappointed they were in their children's teachers who just didn't do much,
Oh,
did the bare minimum. And that's the same though in any profession. So I'm certainly not demeaning teachers collectively or saying that I'm exceptional, because I am not exceptional. At the school where I teach, there were many, many people who worked their asses off to the level that I did. If not, well, I don't know if it's possible to do more because there weren't more hours in the day. But I would say there was a total suspension of boundaries.
a total suspension of boundaries. What do you
They
mean?
did not exist. So students would email me at midnight. If I was up, I responded.
Mm,
If they asked if they could Zoom with me on something at 8 o'clock at night, I Zoomed with them. It was there was I was completely married to my technology during that time. And I know that there are many people who would say that that was an unhealthy approach, that I wasn't teaching students, the importance of respecting my autonomy and my space. But you know what? It was a goddamn pandemic. Nobody knew how to navigate a pandemic. And what I knew is that I had what I saw as a moral obligation and a professional obligation to give every single thing I had to give to these students
to your
and
girls.
to my girls. They deserved it. They needed it. Some of them rejected it. I'm not going to lie. I mean, there were some kids who completely checked out. They just said, nope, I'm out. But that was really a very small minority. And like we were not allowed to make Zoom meetings required, because this was at a period where we were still trying to ensure that all of our students had technology. So the school did a brilliant job with that, though, in terms of when we saw on that Friday, the 13th, that we were going to be closed for several weeks, we sent students home with computers. Whatever computers we had in the building went home with students who didn't have them.
Mm,
And I think they did some hotspots. Our technology department was like, okay, we're pulling out all the stops here. We got to make sure there's equity and access.
yes.
So, and then as the pandemic continued, we had administrators literally driving all over the Chicago area, bringing technology to our students so that they would be able to connect. So that was a really important thing that our school did. Um, and so Google Classroom became, basically the connector. And, I was on Google Classroom all the time. And what I decided to do was create slide decks every day. So regardless of if you could get on to the call or whatever was happening in your life, by so Trinity required that by 8 a.m. we had lessons uploaded to our Google Classrooms. And we weren't required to have a set amount of Zoom meetings. I mean, it was strongly suggested we have at least two, but that we couldn't require them. But
Mm.
I did them a lot. But I got so focused on these slide decks. I mean, for each class I taught, they would take like 2 hours to make.
Yes.
And, they'd be like, how are you feeling today? And then they'd write a little, and then, I might have like a funny video. And then I would, depending on what the lesson was, I might have primary source or pages in the reading. And then they'd come back and they would, answer questions about it. And it was very straightforward. And what my students told me at the end of last year was, I had one student who said, well, there was one day that I didn't do a slide deck, and she said I almost fell apart because she said, I just knew that every morning when I woke up, there would be a slide deck from Mrs. Klein.
So you developed this new routine that
Yeah,
that allowed you to work around the no required Zoom. You used
right.
Google Classroom and slide decks, and that was a new routine for your students. They hadn't been doing it
Yes.
prior to, and they relied on it so much that you have the students say that everything fell apart without it. Is that
Mhm.
is that a is that something that you'll take with you? Like, what is that a gift of in your teaching practice?
Yes. So, yes. And another thing, and this was kind of cool. I don't know if Lindy told you this, but when the pandemic started with my IB students, so one of the things that we do so much of International Baccalaureate is multi-perspective views of history by looking at all different kinds of source material. It's what their internal investigation, their internal assessment is about. And there's, this really rich accessibility to groups on Facebook. I know it's so nerdy to be in like the IB history diploma candidate Facebook group for teachers, so nerdy. But this one has thousands of teachers on it. And it's run by this fabulous uh, uh, Englishman named Russell Tarr, who teaches in Toulouse, France, and he
Mm,
runs it, he moderates it. And so, we all were like on this going, oh my God, what do we do? Ah. So somebody had posted somebody, it was a teacher from California, I don't even know who it was, but a pandemic journal. And, he wanted his students to be observing things and kind of keeping a digital journal. And I thought, oh my gosh, this would be perfect for my IB students. So I kind of pivoted the assignment. I made it about making a primary source for future students. And I made it a required element of the class.
yes.
And they had to write in it several times a week. Sometimes some students just use art for it. Some students hand wrote it. Some people did a whole like Google Slides digital thing. Well, this resonated so much in the community that we were in the Tribune, we were in the Sun Times, um, NBC interviewed us for the Chicago NBC station. And I think because I think it resonated so much with adults because it was just so commonsensical. The assignment just made sense for the moment that we were living in.
To
It
have
wasn't
record their experience and then share that with adults. There was a curious audience.
There was, and I said, to the girls, I'm not sharing what you write. The only person who will have eyes on this
Mm.
is me. It wasn't until we started getting all of these requests for interviews and examples that I would ask the girls, what are you comfortable sharing? Are there certain slides that you're okay with being in the newspaper? And they loved it. I mean, what a great affirmation of their work. And it's pretty emotional for me because a lot of my students told me later that was one of the only things they looked forward to doing every day.
Mm.
That when they didn't feel that they could focus on chemistry or their other classes, they would just sit down and write in the journal.
Mm.
And some of them used humor. I mean, some of these kids could write for SNL. I mean, I have this one student who's so quiet in class. Had she not had this journal assignment, I never would have known this part of her personality. She made me laugh every single day
Yes.
because of what she would write. And then I had students who were really focused on the metrics. Every day they would say number of cases, people who've died. They were kind of looking on the scary side, but I think it was their coping mechanism
Mm.
too. When you can't control anything in your life, you'll find something that
Mm.
you want to read or
And
some way of making sense of it, I guess is the better way to say it.
when you say it makes you emotional, and I saw the tears coming up for you, what is that emotion that you're feeling and reflecting on the importance of this?
I think I think it's emotional for me because I had no idea how powerful the project would be. I had no idea that kind of in my mad dash, because, we were on the last day of school was March 13th. That next week was our spring break. So I used my entire spring break, everybody at our school used our entire spring break planning for how we were going to manage what was coming. So that's when I was like living on these Facebook, this Facebook group, getting ideas. I thought, oh, this is cool. I'll make it, IB appropriate. And so it really fits in with the learning standards and the goals. And this will be a cool thing to do. And something that I guess it's emotional for me also that I was able to give them a way to process their own emotions during such a difficult time for them. And they were they were just they were just so heartfelt, and just the feedback from the girls about how much they loved doing it.
Mm.
It just made me think, hey, maybe I did an okay job after all.
Maybe.
Maybe I made it so it wasn't a total bust for them
Mm.
to be in my class last spring. If that's the only thing that they take away from last spring, great, good, because they also learned themselves some coping mechanisms for when trauma happens again in their lives. Or maybe it was also simultaneous to some other things that they were experiencing, but that by having an outlet for their emotional expression, but also having an adult, a teacher who really cared about their emotional health and well-being during this time, that was really fundamental to how I looked at my role teaching last spring.
Mm.
Absolutely. And I think that I think it just reinforced the import of educators in our society, and also the devastating reality of how teachers are just overlooked, and I don't want to say abused, that's not the right word, but I mean, if you did an hourly for what I made last spring, I probably made 10 cents an hour. Like that's ridiculous.
Yes. So underpaid.
Underpaid, underappreciated, and yet not underappreciated by my girls,
Mm,
and their parents are lovely. And that's another thing about teaching at the school. I mean, the greatest parents, they just appreciate everything you do. They're just absolutely lovely.
mm,
So, and now that's also not taking into account those students who did check out, and that was devastating as well. And fortunately, we also have a really terrific counseling department and administration, and they would reach out to those students separately. So I think what was nice for teachers at my school is that we did not feel that we were flying solo.
mm.
We felt, we still had department meetings. I would check in with my teachers all the time. How are you doing? And I said to them, I was so afraid they would quit. And I just said, it will never be this hard again. It'll never be this hard again. Just hang in there. You're doing a great job. I just kept giving them all this affirmation, like, that looks great. just keep just keep doing what you're doing and
And
sign your contract for next year.
did you have someone to support you?
um yeah, there's a one of the kind of cool things about Trinity is there's a great appreciation for middle-aged women who took some time out of their out of their careers to do some other things. And so there are several women about my age who made very similar life choices, and I think we all approached last spring very similarly. I mean, when I talk about my experience, yes, this is my experience, but there are some pretty tremendous other examples just in my school, and I think that's what was pretty powerful is feeling at the end of the school year, wow, we did this.
Mm,
And this is kind of a cool aside. So I had my 50th birthday during the pandemic, and and my sorority sisters, again, I hesitate to use that word, but Lindy was in this group as well. Um, we were all turning 50, and or many of us were turning 50 during the pandemic, and we were supposed to all be getting together. One of our girlfriends had died of melanoma a few years ago, and we get together every year and we do this Miles for Melanoma walk, and it's our way of celebrating Kathy, but also being together. And so we were going to do this big one for our 50th birthdays, and that we had to cancel. And unbeknownst to me, some of my friends had reached out to Trinity's advancement department
mm,
and said, um, we are wondering if we can set up a one-time only uh, donation link and raise money, because Trinity established basically not a foundation, that's not the right word, but a fund to help our students, because so many of our students were struggling financially as a result of the pandemic. And I had no idea any of this was going on. There was a Zoom call the night before my birthday, and one of my really dear, dear friends from college lives in Chicago. And she had dropped something off for my husband. And so we're on the Zoom call, and all of a sudden, all these people from all these different parts of my life are showing up on the Zoom call, like family and high school friends and college friends and Chicago friends. And well, they raised over $2,500 for Trinity for my birthday.
Poor girls, for your birthday.
I know. And they put together this just absolutely beautiful, they had all written things. And then the person in our IA department made this beautiful, kind of image that had all of their comments. And it was, it was like, this is so cliche, but it was literally like, it's a wonderful life, like all these people who, you know, do all these fabulous things. Some of my girlfriends are just, captains of industry and leaders in their field, and, make more money in a day than I make in my entire yearly salary. And here they were honoring the work that I was doing in the most meaningful way they ever could, which was raising money for my girls. And that was pretty powerful. I don't think I don't think that birthday could ever be topped. And it was pretty exciting. And we did a full graduation for our seniors in the parking lot. And it wasn't just some lame drive-through. We built a stage. The theater department built a stage, and literally the girls would walked across this little mini stage, and their parents and their family could be there, and they'd get the picture. I mean, literally the school did everything you could possibly imagine to create opportunities to celebrate the girls. It was
Yes.
really cool.
And you did too. All of these opportunities to celebrate their creativity, their emotional health, and of
Yeah.
course to provide even financial support through your birthday.
I know, isn't that so great? I was blown away. Obviously I don't have trouble speaking, and I was speechless. Like literally, I first of all, I was so surprised. And then second of all, for them to have known that that was the most meaningful thing that they could have done,
Mm,
that people who I hadn't even talked to in years were donating to this, that these people in my life were able to see in how I lived my life what was and what is important to me. It was such a validation of the choices that I've made.
mm.
And I, I wish everybody could have an experience like that in their life. Because it was very powerful. It was life changing, really.
Life-changing. Julie, as you know, this conversation is based on a compassion capstone. And compassion, as we are defining it in my
Mhm.
course, is a leaning into suffering. And what
Mhm.
strikes me is that for your snippets about being overwhelmed and terrified for your students and your heartache, that actually I'm hearing a lot of celebration and
Yes.
gratitude and innovation. And I'm surprised by it and really grateful. I when you think of compassion in this year, or name a virtue
Mhm.
actually, like what what comes to mind for you to capture this year in terms of a virtue or compassion?
This is pretty easy, because, just, moving forward to what this past year has been, we've been on site the whole year, and hybrid, obviously. And I remember the first day that, because you have your couple teacher days before you go back to school, and our president said, "Here's the goal for tomorrow: take attendance."
Hmm.
Because remember, for these schools that were in person, okay, we had to get all kinds of technology in place. You had to have this mainframe computer
Yes.
in every learning space. You had to have all the teachers mic'd, knowing how to use Zoom. You had students in front of you who were socially distanced and masked. You were not in your classroom. I was in a cafeteria
Right.
for a lot of the year, and in
Cafeteria.
a choral room. I had nothing. I had not a single thing that I'm used to having to teach with. All
So
I had, yeah, was my computer.
so put a fine point on what it means that the big cheese says take attendance. How
What
does
that
that?
means is that she got it. She
Yes.
understood.
Understand.
And I when you say leaning in to challenge and compassion, that's what made this year doable. And that's why I honestly, I've been telling people this whole time. It's one of the most gratifying years of my career
Mm.
because there was such an understanding in the community where I work of how hard it really was and is. Hang on one second, I got to get a charger. Hold on.
Of course.
Sorry.
No,
There we go.
perfect. So I think
There we go.
I heard you saying that for you in this year, compassion was understanding.
It was understanding. It was kindness. Kindness was big, and it was also selflessness. And I think what I saw in my community across the board was it didn't matter if you were, working in the front office, if you were helping out as a parent. We had parent volunteers who helped, just kind of with the checking in and the temperature checks and all kinds of things like that, to being a teacher, to being an administrator. As cheesy as this sounds, and I feel like, cue Disney music right here, but we were all in it together. We really were. And the only way it was going to work is if we all had that attitude. And every single teacher, I don't care how long you've been teaching, every single teacher last year was a first year teacher. Because it did not matter what your knowledge base was of the subject. It was all about how you were transmitting that knowledge. And doing so, it didn't matter if you were 65 or 25, you had to learn how to navigate this technology. You had to show up every day with your mask. I mean, we had some people who had like the air tube filter things going into their, I mean, it was like being on Mars, but we had immunocompromised teachers who were still showing up. And remember, this was pre vaccine.
Yes.
So, you were every day that we went in there, we're like, oh, well, I sure hope I don't get it today. But we also were very realistic, and we knew that masks worked, and the students wanted to be there too.
Yes.
And the students were hilarious. And I just love the shared experience. I kind of look at pandemic teaching in two different categories. There was last spring that was full lockdown terror. Nobody had any idea what was happening. You couldn't leave your house. Holy cow, what's happening in the world? And then there was last year, which was, wow, we are really in this deep. But, don't forget that during this, we're also having a racial crisis with George Floyd. Okay, we're having the most contentious election. We're having constant fluctuations in terms of employment and jobs for many of my students' parents. We have people dying in their families. We had to do a pivot to a pause, an adaptive pause in January when the numbers just were skyrocketing. I taught on the day of the insurrection. I mean, this is not it was mental just as a pandemic. But if you look at what else coincided with this year, it was extraordinary. And teaching history during this year was, I mean, I don't even have words, trying to teach about an election when our nation was so horribly polarized was a feat in itself. It's you don't please everybody. there were, I'm sure, some parents who thought I taught too much from a liberal perspective, but then I have students who had no idea who I voted for. So you couldn't please everybody. You did the best job you could. And there were some times when I just thought, you have no idea how hard this is. You have no idea how little money I make. And yet I still show up every damn day for this job and give you everything I have.
Yes.
So, but those times were very limited. And, like we did this really cool thing. This was, I don't even know, I think the administration came up with it, where, we had all these freshmen coming in and we couldn't have cafeteria service. We had to have students bringing in lunches, but we needed them also to bond with each other. And so we started this thing called lunch circles, where each teacher and often administrator had about 8 students who we ate lunch with every single day. And they put me with freshmen, probably because I'm such a spaz. And they knew that I would get them talking. And, basically my job was to keep them safe, to make sure they're following the rules, and to also make sure they got to know each other. So at the end of the year, no matter how bad it was, they would at least have this lunch circle group. So it sounds dreadful. It was a flippin' blast. And it was so fun. I had this one student, Maggie, who, I don't know how she got this in her head, but she would come to school. She had this spiral and she would put like brain teasers and get to know you questions and things like, would you rather be this or that? And, here are all these freshmen, they don't even know each other. They're in masks, like they're drinking out of their water bottle, like, putting their masks on, eating a carrot, like, well, I think I'd rather be this.
But it was, but that was her selflessness in building community.
And I think that's what was extraordinary about the year. There were so many Maggies, in my school, whether they were students or whether they were teachers or staff. There were so many people who were like, yeah, this is tough. And this is not what I want. And this is not what I expected my freshman year to be like. But God damn it, I'm going to make the best of it. And it was kind of like one of those things where, like when somebody yawns and you watch them yawn and then you yawn and then everybody's yawning. Yes. It was kind of like kindness and selflessness begets more kindness and selflessness. And okay, here's another one. So for homecoming, we couldn't do the big assembly and the dance. And so God love the executive council. These are the students. They just wanted to do something. So the only thing that they could come up with, which is so wonderful, was a lunch circle chalk contest. Okay, so this is what we did. We went outside, okay, in the parking lot, and there's a sidewalk around the school because it's in a residential area. And each lunch circle got 3 sidewalk squares, okay, and the same number of pieces of chalk. And you went outside at lunch and you had half an hour to draw a picture representing Trinity. There was a contest, okay? You have never seen 400 teenage girls think that chalk is the greatest thing since sliced bread. And I swear it's because all the teachers were like, oh yeah, we're going to win this. And not only are we going to win it because each one of you is going to be part of it. And they were like bartering with other lunch circle groups for certain colors of chalk. It was hilarious. Yes. I mean, who would have ever thought that something as goofy as that? I mean, that's right out of like second grade. Like that's what you do during a second grade recess or something like that. Not for high school homecoming.
Right.
The IAA office has a moving ice cream thing on wheels, with good humor. So they somebody coming around putting out, giving out the good humor ice cream. And then they had winners. And of course, my lunch circle won.
Yeah.
So during lunch circle, because they did a whole thing on RBG, it was fabulous. And so the winners, the 3 lunch circles that won, got to have Italian ice delivered to their lunch circle the next week.
Chicago, Italian ice delivered.
So again, not the homecoming of your dreams, but it
No.
was something. And I think, when I look back at the year, I think, oh my God, these kids, they're something else, but the teachers were something else too. A lot of teachers would have said, "Ugh, this is stupid. I'm not, this isn't in my job description. I'm not doing this." But that's not what people did, because I think we all just felt like if we're all in, it's going to work. And it just kept going all year long. And through all the fluctuations and through all of the really devastating and terrifying things that were
Yes.
happening,
Yes.
there was still that consistency of kindness and selflessness that I think was very unique to my school. I really feel that way.
And from your school and your energy so clearly, I am astounded by how universally I smiled through this conversation in wanting to record student educator stories. I wanted to sort of like open a drain for teachers who were drained, but
Mhm.
you sound so you said it, you've been very rewarded by this
Yeah.
experience.
Don't
And
get me wrong. The last 2 weeks that I've been on break, I said to my husband, I literally, I just don't have energy. And I think it's my body just saying, you can relax now, and I feel like I'm not accomplishing anything in my day. But, like last night we ate dinner and we were watching Chopped. And and I looked at him, I said, isn't it awesome that I'm not grading, that I'm not
mm,
planning? Because that whole, that work ethic from last spring,
mm,
it carried through the whole year. I mean, it was, I gave myself Saturdays off. I didn't work on Saturdays because I would have lost my mind if I didn't give myself a break. But
uh,
I was off in the last car in the parking lot. And I would come home in time to have dinner with my family. And then I would work another 4 hours after dinner. And I was
yes, you did.
always the last person in my house to go to bed. And, that's one of the things that infuriates me for people who say that, oh, teachers are just working this. And that's another thing. I've actually talked to some of my Duke friends about, is many teachers unions have really done a disservice to students. I mean, to teachers. I feel like, I don't know if this is just a function of me being in a private school now because I was in the teachers union at New Trier, but I definitely feel that have been unions that are really, really not recognizing the devastating effects of not being in school for these students. And there was one point where I was with one of my classes and something new had been taken away that they were hoping for. I forget what it was. And I literally started crying. And I think they looked at me like, oh my gosh, she's lost it completely. And I had just been in conversation with a good friend who's in the Bay Area, who's a child psychiatrist who has 3 teenagers. And I think the Bay Area public schools have been closed all year, pretty much, haven't they?
They opened partially in April.
Yeah. And she was sharing, this is, adults don't understand
Mm,
that teenagers aren't expendable,
mm,
that this is really, really hard on them, and we just keep jerking them around, like, oh sure, yes, we're going to be open, but then we're not going to be open, or then we're going to close, or this school can be open but this school can't be open, and really, really messing with
mm.
emotions of teenagers. And I also feel like, I think I was really emotional with my girls because I I wanted them to know that, and this is such a cliche thing to say, but that I really saw them. I really saw what they were going through. And I was so sad in that moment because they didn't deserve this. No one deserves a pandemic. But it seems that our society is looking at they're looking at the elementary school kids, terrified of learning loss. These kids are all going to learn how to read, just like they all learn how to go to the bathroom, you know, and then they look at teenagers like, oh, but they're old enough to know how to navigate technology. Yeah, but you know what? You know what's going on in their brains right now? There's so much developmental stuff that you don't see or measure.
Mm,
And I think we're really going to pay the price for that neglect as a society.
mm.
And we have to be ready for it.
Ah, I appreciate that you helped reframe and remind that even if this experience was rewarding and powerful, and there's a lot of gratitude, that the heartache, it's a both and situation.
Yeah, it is.
Yes, yes.
It's not, I mean, even though we gave our girls the very best of us, the very best that we could give under the circumstances, there's still tremendous loss. There's the teams that didn't get to compete at state because state tournament was over. There were students who live for, their extracurricular activities and their seasons were 6 weeks or they were cut short because somebody tested positive for COVID and the whole team had to go into quarantine. It isn't an ideal
Mm,
year that you ever want to have repeated.
mm,
I feel lucky that I got to have the year that I did where I had it.
mm,
And I know that the majority of students and teachers did not share in that feeling
mm,
of, hey, we did it,
mm,
you know, and that's devastating, as just a human being, as an adult who's lived half my life. And it's kind of like when you're a mother or a parent and you think it's not about me anymore, it's about my kids, it's about their experience. Like I've already done that. And when you think of these teenagers who you're with every day and what they've lost, and you just have to focus
mm,
on, yes, but they have also gained this sense that they can do this, that they
mm.
can really face the unknown. One of the things that we did, as a department, I don't know if you have time for me to
Go
express
on.
this to you, um, because of the success of the pandemic journal last spring, I had a met with my department and I said, call me crazy, but what do you think about having this be a departmental wide thing that we do with all of our students, regardless of what class they're taking or grade level? Because the way that our school year worked, we were in school Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. Wednesday was an asynchronous learning day. And that's when we had all of our faculty and department meetings, and then student clubs met in the
Mm,
afternoons. And then we also had office hours, which was uh, just a great solution. So I said, what about, for the sake of providing, predictability, we have the exact same assignment every single Wednesday for every single kid in social studies. And they loved it. They're like, this is a great idea.
yes,
So what we decided to do, and I can send it to you if you want me to,
I love that.
the template for it, because we put together this whole thing. We said, let's change the theme of it each block, which in a normal school would be each quarter. And let's not just make it this pandemic journal. Let's call it the social studies journal,
Mm,
because this year is going to be nuts.
mm,
And kids benefited so much from it last spring. Why are we making this only something that is for IB students? Because at our school, you can be partial IB, you can be full IB, you can be no IB, but everybody should benefit from being an IB school. So we had the very first block about race and racial injustice. And we made that the focal point of, the journal. So we also created a little bit more of a unified assignment with a rubric because we needed to quantify it, but we quantified it as a summative assignment.
Yes.
So it weighed very heavily in their grades. So it was a way of saying, look, all you have to do is do it and you'll get it was worth a test grade. So it was also a way of kind of padding the grade a little bit, recognizing that life is not normal, but also giving them the space to really kind of interrogate how they were feeling. And they could write, they could go on Newsella, they could go, we subscribed to New York Times Up Front magazine. It could be anything. So they had to provide the link to the article and they had to write at least 250 words reflecting on the article. And that was the Wednesday asynchronous assignment. So these kids have a whole year of a digital journal.
Yes.
The second block, it was on the election. The third block, things were so scary with the pandemic where we just said, things are too heavy. And so one of my colleagues said, what if we do the theme of tell me something good?
Oh, tell me something good.
Yeah. So, there's like, is it John Krasinski?
Yes, it is. It is.
Who did the whole
good news or
good news, yeah. And there's like the good news network. So we said, we don't care what it is, as long as it's good news, you can write about it. Well, these kids, they just found the greatest things, in Chicago. And then because they couldn't just do a summary, they had to actually reflect on it, and they'd say things like, oh my God, this kid just, made tacos for everybody in his neighborhood or something. And isn't that awesome? And, it was just a way for the kids just to feel good when they were doing their history homework.
So the three blocks or trimesters of
Yeah.
social studies for the whole school in their social studies journal were race, election, and tell me something good.
And then the last one was for block 4. It was kind of back to pandemic because of the vaccine.
Pandemic.
So we said we were pretty open about block 4. We said, if you want to just focus on tell me something good, great. If you want to be focused on race, great. Because then the trial, the Derek Chauvin trial.
Yes.
And so we wanted to give kids the space to reflect on whatever it was that was resonating with them in that moment. And they got a really good grade for it.
Yes. That's a very important summative grade.
It was. So my thing is now is I've got this unbelievable record from hundreds of students. All right. From last March. From last March, I have it from 60. And then I have all of the kids who took social studies. So like they might take it blocks 1, 3, and 4. So, not every kid took a social studies class, every single block, but you have every single kid at Trinity did the journal. So now I'm thinking, what can I do with this as an educator? Like, where do I go with this? And it's this incredible primary source of what their experience was.
Your students created a primary source.
Yes.
Synthesis of, do you know what a primary source is? I, as a student at Trinity, created one. So you have this amazing record from your students. We now have this record of your experience. So Julie, your exit ticket is, describe how it feels to have processed this for an hour and 40 minutes?
Um, it feels pretty damn good. I guess is the best way to say it. I think it makes me feel lucky in a lot of ways that I was part of this really
Mm,
extraordinary experience with my students, with my girls, and I have a lot of gratitude,
mm,
and I also have a lot of gratitude for even having a forum to share this.
yeah.
So I'm grateful for you for even wanting to hear my experience, and that's pretty cool.
Welcome. Thank you for sharing your experience. And therefore, if you had to look at this quadrant again, and you could choose a color or a specific word, where would you plot yourself now?
Um, I'm kind of like, let's see, I'm kind of in like the content, thoughtful,
Ah,
but I also have joyful. Joyful is sticking out to me.
I love that. Thank you. That's really perfect. That's really perfect. Thank you. Julie, I am so grateful that Lindy connected us. When I told her that I'm doing this project, she immediately,
Did she?
oh, you have to talk to my friend Julie, and I can see why you all are so close. You bring a lot of energy to this conversation, such compassion for your students. We're all really fortunate that you were a teacher during pandemic. Thank you
Thank you.
for service.
Thank you. I mean, thank you for doing this project. I hope it really sheds light, on the work that teachers have been doing the last year and a half, because I know there are many teachers for whom this was a dreadful year
Mm,
for many different reasons. And a lot of them did not receive support from their administration.
right.
And I can't imagine how devastating that would have been as a teacher to
Mm,
feel that your administration didn't appreciate you, didn't support you, didn't see you. Um, that's hard. It's really hard.
for
And
shedding light on your experience. And I will be in touch with where this goes, who
yeah,
to it, the
so
website.
cool.
I'm looking forward to following the rest of your journey. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you for having me. This is very cool. I can't wait to see what the final product looks like.
Awesome. Thank you. Bye, Julie.
Bye.